My guest today is Denise Lever. She runs a Prenda microschool that she launched in August of 2020 in the rural town of Eager, Arizona, in Apache County, which is one of the poorest counties in the US and one of only 3 counties in the entire country where neither English nor Spanish is the primary language spoken at home. In Apache County, that language is Navajo. Denise is also an administrator of 5 other independently operated Prenda microschools in her town of Eager. Denise Lever, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here. I just think this is a fascinating story. I'm such a big fan of Prenda, which was, of course, started in 2019 out of Kelly Smith's home, the founder of Prenda, and has now grown and multiplied across the country, serving thousands of students and helped to activate entrepreneurial parents and teachers like you all across the country to provide really community-based, child-centered, individualized learning solutions, often in private homes or commercial spaces, which is where your programs are based. So I'd love to hear more about that. But let's start a little bit, Denise, if we could, with your background of what were you doing before August of 2020 when you became an education entrepreneur? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I was homeschooling my own children at the time, and we had chosen to do that because my original career was in wildland firefighting. And when it became time for us to settle down and start having children, it was difficult to maintain a fire position at the time. Socially, in the 80s, it was women who took up a position that while they were pregnant for a whole year was not really something, it was really frowned upon. So we decided I would leave the workforce and raise our children. But my husband continued with his firefighting career, and that meant moving on average every 2 years. We moved 9 times in 13 years. And so, to give our kids some consistency and to have a flexible schedule to meet the demands of firefighting, my husband was oftentimes gone all summer and home between at the holidays. And so, we would schedule our homeschool so we took that time off between Thanksgiving and New Year's was our big break, so we could visit and travel and do things like that. And then we moved into this community about a decade ago, and we became known as the homeschool, one of the new homeschool families. And I ended up developing a consulting business at the time because people would come to me with a crisis. Their needs wouldn't be met for whatever reason locally, and they would need some help deciding on what their choices were in the state, what were legal options for removing their children from the public system. And so I was doing some consulting, and then people were asking me to homeschool their kids, and it really was at the time not an option. I just didn't have the bandwidth schooling my own children and running a small consulting business. So then COVID hit and Prenda became an option. And it really was such a blessing because it made it, a, there was the financial benefit then finally for taking in other people's children and doing that work with them versus just spending time with my own children.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about how Prenda works and how you discovered them in 2020.
Well, I was reading, I've always been interested in more transparency around the education system. And so I was reading an article in Forbes, and I saw this interview with Kelly, and I was just really impressed with what he was doing and the opportunities it created for people who, especially women who were caregivers and had left a system, and then they had this opportunity to become entrepreneurs and at the same time provide what they felt was important for their family. And so it- his company gave me the option of continuing to school my children while providing for others, and there being the financial incentive to do that. So Prenda let me set up my own micro school, and I enrolled 7 other learners and then my child, and we just kind of took off. I rented a space and started my school.
Amazing. So this was again August of 2020. You have this small micro school, or I guess that's redundant, but you have a few learners. And were the other students in addition? to your own children new to homeschooling? Had they come to homeschooling as a result of COVID and the school shutdowns, or were they already homeschooling? I guess what was the composition like of that initial year?
In my first year, I had one child that was homeschooled had been previously homeschooled, and the rest of my learners came from public school. So
Mm.
it was initially a friend of mine whose son was starting kindergarten, and she really didn't want him to have to face the system at the time. And he had a speech impediment. And so masking and things were going to be very difficult for him to be seen and heard. And so she had been asking me what her options were, and we found Prenda, and then we recruited another family. They had heard about what we were doing, and their students were struggling also. So I ended up with 6 from 2 different families to start.
And what was the age range? Because I think one of the neat things about Prenda is that it's this mixed age environment, sort of this 21st century version of the one room schoolhouse. What was the age distribution like for you?
My first 3 years I did K through 8th.
Okay. And has that
So it was
changed now
beautiful.
or
Yes, because now I have this really growing network of micro schools, and we do a little bit of differentiation. So I found that a lot of people are more comfortable when they start. They feel more comfortable with the younger grades. They're sadly a lot of people don't feel academically equipped to teach 5th grade math or 7th grade science. And so when they start a school, they really are interested in that K through 2 oftentimes. And so what I would do is I would develop a program, and then I would hand off my K through 2 to someone who was ready to start program, and I would just stay with 3rd through 8th. And so then it's kind of, and then some of my students have stayed with me the entire time.
amazing. Okay, so let's talk about then what happened from your one pod in 2020 to 2021 to now supporting multiple micro schools in your town. In this again, this rural community, you said you have about 6,000 people in your town. Um, how did that scaling process go for you? What were the indicators that there was a demand for more?
Well, I had a lot of people contacting me. I tried to kind of fly under the radar because I didn't have the space or the bandwidth to open like an additional second micro school on top of the one I had. And then one of my parents, one of my first founding parents, young family, 5 kids, her husband developed cancer at the beginning of our second year. And so her students schooled with me remotely, and she spent 9 months taking care of her husband. And she saw there was just this, we could just continue with what we were doing. And even though they were 4 hours away and living in a friend's basement while her husband received treatment, and in the process, her husband then didn't have an income. And so it really struck home with me how many people this could happen to. How many women are caregivers at home who've chosen that life and then through circumstances need some kind of income, and they have to really kind of pull themselves up. So um, I convinced her the second year then that she should launch a micro school. Um, and so that was kind of where the process of me shedding the littles to her. She shadowed me for the first semester of my 3rd year, and then at the second semester, she felt confident and ready to go. So we peeled off littles to her, and she started her own micro school. And then when the ESA program finally took off and was established in Arizona in January, I have another friend who I had been kind of like recruiting for a while, and she was not interested in a charter partner. So when it became an option to be ESA exclusive, she then launched a micro school in our building. And just every year I found parents who wanted to participate in some way, and we've been able to launch, a total of 5 schools.
So amazing. So tell us a little bit more about Arizona's robust ESA program, their school choice program. You mentioned that that's been a catalyst for some of these new Prenda founders to launch. How does that work in practice?
So it is a true scholarship program. It is not a voucher. You do not have to turn in a ticket to a private school to participate. Um, it's a it's an application done through the State Department of Education, and starting in would have been July of 2022, Governor Ducey signed the legislation to make it universal. So now every student in Arizona has access to 90% of the state funds that the school district was receiving. And it is put into a digital wallet for the parents, and then they access that money for approved education services. And Prenda microschools are one of those services that parents can access. And the other thing I'm really proud of that our group is doing is we're creating new vendors every day. We work with, I have a Suzuki trained music teacher who's now an ESA vendor that comes in and delivers private lessons and group lessons during our school. We have a jujitsu program that's ESA funded. And we're able to support all these other small businesses with ESA funds and keep some of that money locally.
Just amazing. And I know you said that you have sort of two groups of families participating. You have independent homeschoolers who are not receiving any taxpayer funding, not participating in the ESA program at all, because in some cases, those families want to participate in local district sports, school sports, and they are not able to do that if they are receiving ESA funds. And then you have other families who do choose kind of home education option with the ESA. And that enables them to access this funding. And for the latter group, Denise, um, what is the funding that they're getting? Is that fully covering their tuition at the micro school? I guess, how does the financial piece work?
Yes, the parents are paying out of pocket, and that is a choice they have to make. Our school district voted to not allow students receiving ESA funds to participate in extracurricular activities. And right now, at the legislative level, that it is up to the local school district. It is not required one way or the other through the legislation. So our school has chosen not to accept any students that are ESA funded. So um, for any of our students that wish to play in any sports or extracurriculars, they need to provide an affidavit of intent to homeschool to the district. So that's what they do. And then they access our program completely privately.
And then for the ESA students, the families who are choosing home education with the ESA option, so not sort of these independent homeschoolers that you talked about, um, are their costs being fully covered through the ESA, or how does that model work?
Yes, yes, we choose as a group through our program called Baker Creek Academy Learning Center. We choose to keep our tuition approximately $1,000 below what the average state funding is for the student,
Hmm.
and that gives the families the opportunity to access music lessons and jujitsu and things like that that we also offer, that they can then choose one of those classes on top of our program.
So what is the tuition that you're charging then?
Our tuition is 4,000 a year.
Okay, but most families are getting a total of around 5,000.
They're getting about 7,500.
Okay.
The tuition that we charge is then in addition to the Prenda fee. The Prenda fee to access the Prenda curriculum is a separate fee. And
Got
that
it.
goes directly to Prenda, and they do our billing for those students who choose to use that program. And then there are other students who access us and they have their own curriculum fee based on what program their parents choose to access.
Got it, but you're still staying below that ESA amount, so that families can have some funding left over, again, for these enrichment and extracurricular activities, which is so great. So Denise, tell us about how Prenda works in practice. So the learners come to your micro school, full-time, part-time? What are they doing when they're there? How does the day look?
So we use the Prenda model in general across the board. Whether a student happens to be enrolled in Prenda or not, our day follows the Prenda model basically. So we start out with usually the first half hour is our camp program, which is our community, autonomy, mindset, and purpose, which works on our social emotional skills. And then our second segment of the day is their Conquer. So students that are enrolled in Prenda access their Conquer tools, which is their basic reading, writing, and arithmetic through an online platform that Prenda provides. And in that platform, we have the option of accessing multiple different math or language programs, some supplemental writing programs, some literature programs, things like that. Um, then my classroom, each of the classroom functions a little bit differently, and then my classroom will have lunch, and then after lunch we do our collaborate, which is basically our science and history. And it can also be Socratic discussion, debate, math games, things like that. So we have a rotating schedule. On Monday, it's Socratic discussion. On Tuesday, we do a writing program. On Wednesday, I actually have a guide who has a complementary class to mine. So I take third, fourth, and fifth and do history, and she takes sixth, seventh, and eighth and does science in her room. And then we swap on Thursday. So I take the older kids for science for history on Thursday, and she takes the younger kids on for science. I do history, she does science. And then the end of our day is their create period. And so some of our kids access their private lessons, like their music lessons during their create period. And then others use the Prenda platform to do their project-based learning during that time.
So you said Monday through
On a 4 day a
Thursday?
week schedule.
4 day,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. And is that
Yep.
standard in the district too? I know more and more school districts moving towards that model.
Correct. Our local district is a 4 day week, but they
Yeah,
run a longer hour. They run a like 7:30 to 2:30, 3 o'clock program, and we're a 9 to 2:15 program.
amazing. And how many young people do you have across the 5 programs now?
We have 55 enrolled right now, and we'll be adding another 10 at the end of the month. So we are up to about right at 5% of the local school population.
Oh, okay. And so why are families attracted to your micro school model? What are you hearing from current families, these new families that are coming? What do they find compelling?
For a lot of them, they think they see their children as the individuals that the system can't. And so, um, depending on the family, some of them have some real educational struggles that have not been able to be met in the standard industrialized system. And we offer a family model instead of an industrial model of schooling. We have multiple ages, and it's very easy to remediate a child because there's no stigma. If a child reads at a third grade level, they go pick a third grade book and they can read to a kindergartner and they can feel successful. It
Mm.
doesn't matter if they're enrolled as a fifth grader or a seventh grader, you know. So um, I think the idea that, and we're flexible, we do not require attendance. If families have something on their agenda that is more important to them that day than attending the learning center, we support that.
And you can do that because these are technically homeschooling families, whether they're independent homeschoolers or they're considered home educating ESA families. They do have that flexibility that homeschoolers have long enjoyed around attendance and seat time and all of that. So that's great. So where do you see this going? You said you're going to add another 10 students. You're at 5% of the overall district enrollment, which is just extraordinary. Do you see interest continuing to grow, or what does the future hold, do you think, for your community and your pods?
Yeah, right. We have a 2 year waiting list on average.
Wow.
So yeah. And so people have suggested that we should raise our prices, but that's really not the goal. The goal is to provide an alternative that families can access reasonably. And so what I hope to do is just continue to find caring adults who are interested in launching a Prenda micro school, and we'll just roll them into our group and offer to support them and help them get up and running, and then provide the kids with a network of other micro schools that we can do field trips and school plays and things like that.
Yeah, build that community of micro schools so everyone can have their one-room schoolhouse, academics, but then they have this community that you're building through this network. So maybe you can share a little bit about the space. You're all in one kind of commercial space at the moment, and that may change as you continue to grow. But tell us what the space looks like.
Yeah, right now we're in a very old 1930s commercial storefront. It used to be a church, and initially we had sublet it from the church, and then they were fortunate enough to buy a new building, and we were able to continue leasing it from the property owners. And it's been really amazing. But we would like to find an investor to help us with a build to suit so that we have some more playground space and a little bit better parking and a better drop off situation and things like that. So that's on my list to do in the next year is to find an investor that's interested in supporting this program.
So you mentioned one of the guides, your kind of your second pod that you opened was a mom. Who are you finding is interested in being these guides, and what attracts them to being education entrepreneurs?
Um, all of my all of my new micro school pod leaders are moms. They're all people who've struggled with the system in one way or another.
Hmm.
Some of them have homeschooling experience. About 50% have homeschooled. Some of them have an education background. I have one who was a Mesa public school teacher, and they moved rurally and found that they were dissatisfied with the local school for numerous reasons, and chose to homeschool when they moved into our community. And then when I was looking, I had this waiting list, and I was looking for someone else to add. You know, she we were able to meet up, and we launched her 1st of January.
Incredible. I can't believe you have a 2-year waiting list. So the major challenge then for you, it seems, is finding more entrepreneurial parents or teachers who want to launch these programs. It's not for a lack of demand. Any creative strategies that you've employed to try to kind of boost that growth there?
Well, every student that is accepted into the program, I have a one-on-one with their parents, and I tell them, you know,
Mm.
let's try this. But for all the kids I don't have room, I really encourage them to do the Prenda model at home, to open a single family micro school and start experimenting with alternative education techniques and, you know, how that fits their family's lifestyle. And then I have been able to take a couple of those and convert them to micro school leaders.
Mm. And tell us a little bit about, what do you find special about alternative education, this individualized learning model? What do you think makes it so impactful?
I watched it with my own children, home educating them. My oldest is very academic and really had some really substantial college goals. And the program that we were able to customize for him was completely different than my next child, who like her life goal is to be a cowboy, and she spent her senior year abroad working on a ranch in Mexico. Versus my older son, you know, who was like all about getting into an aeronautical, you know, Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and studying like very specific STEM things, you know. And so having seen how that plays out with my own learners, having being able to customize and enrich and follow their lead, um, I just can't imagine asking kids to sit in a factory system. Any kid that I can help.
So, what is your role as this administrator? Because you're still running a pod, right? And now you're an
Mhm.
administrator for these other independently operated pods. What does that administrator role entail? What kind of services does it provide for these other founders?
Initially, I help people set up their business. I
Mm.
like their LLC. You know, we help them get insurance. You know, I have resources like that that I can share. In addition to that, we help recruit students because we're established. So we build a foundation of trust in our community. And so if I can recommend someone else to do what we're doing, then that helps them. In addition to that, then we arrange professional development. We can collaborate on things like our school production. Like our learning center puts together a play every year, and all the students can participate. And we pool our resources to hire a drama teacher, and we pool our
Mm.
resources to pay the propane bill and things like that. So
Yeah.
most of my administration is really about keeping the businesses afloat, um, while they're busy helping kids.
So tell us about the startup process or challenges, because I have a lot of prospective education entrepreneurs, micro school founders who listen to the podcast. What are sort of those initial steps? You mentioned getting your LLC set up. What does that look like? What does that entail? You mentioned insurance, which can sometimes be a challenge for alternative education providers. I wonder if you can just share some of that startup process and sort of some tips that you've gathered over time.
Well, we're really lucky in the state of Arizona. We have a program called ESA Connections, run by Chris Holmberg, is who I do a lot of work with, and they now have a program where you can access their site, and who will walk an entrepreneur step by step through creating their LLC, which was not available when I started. So we started an LLC. It's like $100 to do in the state of Arizona, relatively inexpensive. And then there's a program it's a homeschool cooperative insurance
Hmm.
that we use that I recommend to people, that gives us a lot of the really great benefits for the cost. After you have insurance, just you need the basics. You need insurance for your site, you need insurance for your learners, and then you need some kind of professional insurance. You don't want someone coming back a decade later and saying, my kid didn't get into Harvard because, they sat next to a window or something. So I do a lot of counseling on that. I think our biggest challenge right now is the cost of space. Arizona has lost some insurance providers, and so our insurance costs in the state are getting very expensive, and retail space is expensive, and some communities are very prohibitive, like for running a micro school out of your home,
Mm.
either because of the CCNRs or because of the business restrictions, running a business in something that is zoned private residential. So that's one reason why we stuck to commercial buildings so far, is because we have business license with the city to run, and we also coordinated with the fire department and got all of our inspections and all those kind of things. So there's a little bit of admin that comes and goes with that. So
So, what is the average sort of cost for a founder to start a program? And obviously, this varies across the state of Arizona and across the country. But what do you find is sort of a rough estimate of the amount of money somebody might have to put forth in order to just open their doors?
the size of the building makes a difference, and also then what kind of program you're using. Um, Prenda has a really fabulous program where they provide a laptop for each child at this point. And so that's one cost. Initially, I had to buy those. That was a couple $1,000s for me out of pocket
Mm.
when I started mine initially, but that's not something right now that if people jump on the Prenda bandwagon, they'll have to put out there. But I would say plan to have at least a $10,000 cushion, unfortunately. When you're talking first, last, for commercial space, a commercial in our area runs about $1 a square foot. We have a 7,000 square foot building. Um, our propane bill last month was $700 to heat the building. So it's substantial, but it's not prohibitive once you get your first, depending on how you're financed.
Hmm. Yeah, but I mean, there is that entrepreneurial risk, right? I mean, it's going out, taking a leap, moving, away from sort of stability and security of working for someone else to working for yourself and providing a service to others, and that's no small feat. So I'm always in awe of these everyday entrepreneurs like you who are, doing this and providing such important services for families in your communities. What do you find most rewarding about being an education entrepreneur?
Oh, hands down, the kids. Bring the kids from the system. I have kids that have come in with a lot of trauma from their education experiences in the past. And when you have a kid that has been told by the system that they're not smart or they're not capable, and then you see them conquer something, it's incredibly rewarding. Just from the everyday, from a little kid learning how to read for the first time, all the way to an older kid who really was failed by the system, and then they have the opportunity to really pursue their own interests and educate themselves and take control of their life for the first time.
So lovely. So you were saying that your pods go up to eighth grade. What about for high school? What did the students end up doing? Have you thought about expanding into high school at some point? I guess, what does that look like?
I do have demand for high school. It's just been right now the demand isn't enough for me to make a choice to go that way because of my square footage. I've had to kind of limit myself for now. Um, we will be launching a high school program. It'll look different. It will be more of a consulting situation where we have office hours and they can come in and get some tutoring if they like, but they're not going to be attending every day necessarily. They'll probably attend in some kind of cohort,
Hmm.
but there's a need. There's a definite need there, and one thing at a time.
Yeah. And what would that look like in Arizona? Would students in high school be sort of doing more dual enrollment, be homeschoolers, but maybe taking community college or college classes or taking online classes? I guess what does that look like? Because it does seem like for high school kids, they are ready in many cases to kind of go off in the world and do more advanced work and have more autonomy. Is that sort of what you're thinking about with that program?
Yes, my own children started high school or started college when they started high school. They all started college at 14. And so most of them are my youngest is 17 years old. He's a junior in high school, and he's half a year away from getting his associates at the same time. He'll graduate with his associates before he even technically officially graduates high school. So that's definitely something we'll be implementing is some kind of co-enrollment and just helping kids work through that, helping them identify their wants, needs, and desires, and then how to make that happen, help them creating actionable plans for their own education and supporting that, and then giving them a safe space to come and work and socialize and not be um, kind of have to be reclusive or hide at home because it's not necessarily the standard option in our community.
I'm just so excited to see where this leads and just wonderful to see all that demand in your community that you're trying to meet and trying to help gather other education entrepreneurs and bring them into this process so that you can serve more families. For my listeners and viewers who want to start a microschool, what advice do you have for them as they venture into entrepreneurship?
There's a lot of people on social media now that have really good ideas. So join groups that are like-minded in whether it's your education platform, like a Prenda platform, or whether it's an unschooling platform. I would say get out there and meet people and start asking advice from people who are doing it in your community because the regulations are so different in each community and the startup costs are so different. I think it really helps to have someone somewhat local that can mentor you and coach you through the beginning steps and then
Great.
support you because some days a success is just nobody cried.
But you're having amazing success. I mean, that's what's so wonderful to hear. Not only academically are your learners thriving, but socially and emotionally. You said a lot of them come to you with trauma from a conventional classroom environment, and that's a real healing process of being in this alternative environment. So, Denise, if my listeners and viewers want to learn more about Prenda, want to learn more about the work you're doing, what is the best way for them to reach out?
Well, they can start with my website, bakercreekacademy.com, and I'm linked to all of the Prenda platform on as well there, which is prenda.com. And definitely check out both. I have a lot of links to other platforms as well and other education entrepreneurs and podcasts like this one and Hannah Frankman's podcast and things like that, where they can learn about what's going on in the world of education.
Best wishes to you, Denise. So excited to see where everything goes for you and really appreciate you being on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely.